So I was looking at some data on foreign investment in Indian stocks, and it seems like there was a pretty big drop in 2024.
Yeah, I saw that too. After really strong 2023, foreign portfolio investors or FPIs really pulled back in 2024, which is kind of surprising, right?
Exactly. I mean, it was a huge change. They only invested about 5,000 crore rupees in equities. What caused this major shift?
Well, a bunch of things actually. High valuations in the Indian stock market made investors a bit cautious. And, there were also geopolitical uncertainties that added to the hesitation.
That makes sense. It's like when you see prices of something you want going way up, you kind of wait to see if they'll come down a little.
Precisely. And on top of that, weak corporate earnings, tensions across the globe, and rising inflation kind of spooked investors.
Okay, so not just one thing, but a mix of stuff. It's almost like a perfect storm for a market pullback.
Exactly. It's like when you're trying to bake a cake and all the ingredients decide to fight against you.
Aha, yeah, I get that. So I guess where did the money go instead of Indian equities?
Interestingly, a lot of the money went into Indian debt markets. The FPIs invested over 1.12 lakh crore in debt, which is a huge increase.
Wow, so they switched to safer investments? It's like they took the money off the roulette table and put it in a savings account.
That's a good way to think of it. India's inclusion in some major bond indices and expectations of lower interest rates in the US really drove that move.
That makes sense. So it's not that they stopped investing, just that they reallocated their funds strategically.
Exactly. It was more of a risk off approach, if that makes sense.
Right. And what about the future? Are things looking up for Indian equities or are they still going to be out of favor?
Well, some analysts are anticipating a rebound in FPI flows into Indian equities in 2025, mainly driven by a cyclical upswing in corporate earnings.
But cyclical upswing, so business performance is expected to improve? It's like after a slow period of growth, you have a season where things take off.
Exactly. Sectors like capital goods, manufacturing, and infrastructure are expected to lead that growth.
Okay, so more focus on the domestic oriented sectors. But what could prevent that from happening?
Well, elevated valuations and cheaper alternatives in other emerging markets like, say, ASEAN and Latin America could constrain these inflows.
So it's like being a kid in a candy store. There are multiple options, and Indian equities will have to compete for investors' money.
That's right. And lingering worries about a global recession could also dampen investor sentiment.
Ah, yes, the big what ifs that always hang around the corner. I guess it's never completely smooth sailing, is it?
No, it's like a ship navigating through different currents. Some days the sea is calm, other days, it's really choppy.
Okay, so mixed signals. So who benefits most if things go well next year in the Indian market?
Well, sectors like financial services and oil and gas, which had seen outflows in 2024, could see a turnaround if FPIs return.
I see. It's like the tide's turning and some sectors that were left behind might catch the wave. What about the debt side of things?
Well, the Indian debt market seems quite attractive right now. The inclusion of Indian government bonds in global indices and, the possibility of interest rate cuts could lead to even more inflows.
So that's a win-win scenario for those markets and they're less prone to the same volatility of equities. It's like a more reliable place to park your money, right?
Exactly. It's like having a steady anchor in a sea of waves. That's the way I see it.
So to recap, we saw a shift from equities to debt in 2024, but there are signs that things could recover in the equity market in 2025.
Precisely. And that recovery hinges on corporate earnings and a favorable global economic scenario, plus, interest rates and all that jazz.
Right, so a lot of factors are at play. Well, this has been very insightful, I must say.
Glad to hear it. It's always interesting to see how these markets move and how global and local factors play off each other.
Totally. So I guess the big question now is, will 2025 bring a resurgence for FPI inflows into Indian equities, or are we in for another surprise?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Only time will tell, but it's certainly something to watch closely.